Hey, what's up? It's Jim, and today I'm going to talk about Infinity Train Book 2. The whole idea of Infinity Train is the idea of bettering yourself through this kind of therapeutic infinite train, I guess. And the whole idea of the numbers is once you have kind of bettered yourself, you can leave. And the whole idea of going through sort of a recovery process or therapeutic process or something like that is the idea of finding yourself. Not to say those people were not selves and didn't have an identity before, but the kind of sort of loss of yourself, loss of who you truly are, who you truly want to be. And in the first Infinity Train, that was Tulip after she had gone through a major thing, wasn't sure where she was, wasn't sure who she was after her parents' divorce, after everything that was going on in her life. In Infinity Train Book 2, it's very different because, in a sense, this is about MT. This is not about Jesse. Jesse is a supporting character. This is about MT and the fact that she has rebelled from being the mirrored image of Tulip, which we saw in Book 1. She has rebelled and has decided not to just be the mirror image of Tulip, decided to become her own self, which we got the beginning, the origin story of in Book 1. But in Book 2, what's happened to her is now she's really trying to get off the train and become her own self. And that's a really interesting way to twist it because it is sort of like a mirror image of the first one, but not entirely. It's almost like a theory-based sequel, which is kind of something I've compared what Owen Dennis does in the Infinity Train Book 1, or just Infinity Train, whatever. It reminded me of older science fiction and Doctor Who, like Tom Baker Doctor Who, John Pertwee Doctor Who, that kind of Doctor Who. Not that they wrote it, but that era, you know what I mean? Where if you'd have a sequel or a follow-up, it'd be more theory-based and less like kind of commercially minded-based, which sci-fi has very much changed in terms of that in the kind of post-Star Wars era. But in Infinity Train, what they've done with Book 2 is not go, like the easy sequel would be, this is about Jesse, and Jesse like learns all this crap or whatever. And Jesse's honestly, I don't think that interesting of a character to be built up to more than he is in this, but you know, maybe they would have written a better Jesse or something. In this, they went, well, wouldn't it be more interesting if you learn the Infinity Train through Tulip? But what about the people who live in the Infinity Train? Do they have identity? Can they have identity? Are they just part of a computer program? And what if they wanted to have an identity? In some ways, instead of going to the Infinity Train to rediscover yourself, what if you are coming from the Infinity Train and want to leave to fully discover yourself? It is completely reversed, and that's what I really like about Book 2, is because it's almost like how the best sequels play off of the original. They play off of what's going on. In some cases, you can completely overreact, and that can totally suck. And I think a lot of sequels try to sort of do the Empire Strikes Back thing. And I think what Infinity Train, it's not trying to be Empire Strikes Back or something, but I think what worked about that sequel is it looked at what Star Wars did and it wanted to do something completely different to play off of that. This does that because it's almost like if you have an amazing vacation at an amazing hotel and you rediscover yourself and then you leave, you don't think about what was the staff like that worked there that I was sort of friends with while I got drunk at the bar those few times. And in a way, that's another interesting story. And that's sort of what they're doing. It's sort of asking you to ask for the identity of sort of a lower class, basically. It's acting like everyone, all the denizens, as I think we just learned in this one that that's her name. Maybe it was in Book 1. It like wasn't important, but you learn that they are just like kind of tied to this train. They can never leave and everything like that. And the whole crux of it, like the whole reason there are police stopping her from escaping from that, is almost both a moral argument and sort of a class argument, because her whole role in life is to help people get off that train. That is all she's there to do. She is nothing more than that. She doesn't have dreams. Well, she does, but it acts like she doesn't. And this is a moral argument, is that do the denizens on Infinity Train deserve to leave Infinity Train if they would like to? Or should they, in fact, just help out the passengers to discover themselves? And is that sort of good enough? And in some cases you might say that sounds like a perfectly happy life, and in other cases you'd be like, Jim, that sounds like a bunch of fucking bullshit and I hate that. And I think Mere Tulip, or MT, or the other name that I'm not going to say because it's a spoiler, is really great. I love that arc because it brings up so many things. And it brings up the things like the mall kids, I think, bring up this whole other argument of like, what if you're in this weird Arrested Development? And like, I know like there's a lot of videos like, what would book 3 be? But I do think like that would sort of be an interesting argument of like, what if you never wanted to get helped on the train? This opens up a lot of more possibilities of kind of the infinite worlds that are within the car and like what the train and all the cars represent and things like that. And it's also interesting that this is since the first one we had the 1-1 shorts, which didn't play into this really very much at all. We got the kaiju car, we got the duck car, which I already got before. Randall was in that one part, but we get sort of references to certain things, but that's sort of like we got hints of another world and then we didn't really get all of it. There's like so many ideas within this. They can have these little shorts and we can get hints of things. And like, I think the tiny wizards showed up in this for a little bit. You don't get too much, like, which I sort of liked. I like how this is such a wide-ranging, large universe. Maybe there were references to every little thing from the 1-1 documentaries that I missed, but I did notice tiny wizard car and the kaiju car and the green car and the cross-eyed ducks car, but that sort of doesn't count because it was in the first one. But I like the infinite world, but I like the moral arguments they bring. Jesse is interesting in that the peer pressure idea as a sidekick who's mainly supposed to go along with someone, what he has to kind of fight is almost fight being a sidekick, which is interesting. I love Alan Dracula. He is such a cool character. He's also very mysterious. It's interesting that I wonder kind of, did he somehow psychically let Jesse know that he wanted to be called Alan Dracula, or did 1-1 hear him calling him Dracula? I don't know. Like I've said before, this reminds me of like the cult, weirder, thought-provoking science fiction that I loved, whether it be old X-Men comics or Doctor Who or something like that. This reminds me of that. And what I love about it is it opens up not just like interesting sci-fi animation worlds, which this show is very good at. It brings up bigger, larger moral arguments, and it brings up the whole idea of a subservient class. And whether that subservient class morally, even though the structure of your whole fucking society is built around them being subservient to it, should they escape from it? Should they be allowed to it? And the answer is, by the way, yes. That shouldn't be a hard moral thing. But that's kind of the whole thing with this argument with MT is, should she be allowed to leave, even though that rips the fabric in this program? And is a life or an identity worth ripping that out from it? And it also brings up like, are there other members, other denizens that would like to get off? Would the cat like to get off or something, you know, things like that? Or do they not want to? Do they actually enjoy it there? Do they not even want to leave? Possibly. I don't know. They didn't really get into that. But the whole idea of these particularly police officers going after her, which are excellently played by Ben Mendelsohn and Bradley Whitford. Bradley Whitford, at first, most people knew him from West Wing, but I guess you guys all probably know him from Get Out at this point. And Ben Mendelsohn has just been in everything. And they are really good. And Kate Mulgrew, who's the cat as well. This has just a really great cast. But they're awesome. And those sequences, one thing I found really interesting about that chase sequence, some of the animation, is the fluidity of the camera through them. Like, there are certain times where they're chasing her, and I was like, if this was a live action thing, they would have made a big deal about him coming out from under the, you know, the reflective thing, and he just like pops out and fluidly grabs her and stuff. And there's such a crazy action sense to it that feels so much more natural. Like, yeah, in this world, like, they really wouldn't care because everyone knows they can do that, so they wouldn't like. But in a movie, they'd be like, "Yo, we spent a lot of money on this like effect, so let's like milk it as much as it can." Same with like, there's an ending animated shot that's like is a great piece of animation that just like the flow to it is absolutely astonishing. And I know like Michael Bay and various other filmmakers try to make that happen through CGI, but there's something about animation that it feels so much more natural in all this. One thing about Infinity Train is I talk about all this live action stuff and Isaac Asimov and like science fiction and written stuff, but it's very much an animated show. It very much goes into the infinite possibilities of animation. And I find it interesting that it can both be like hard science fiction and hard animation all at once in such a beautiful way. I really like Infinity Train. I love what Book 2 is trying to say about kind of class structure and social structure and the idea of an identity, whether if that identity is something that's created to subservient another identity, and whether that identity, even though it's tied to another one, deserves its own sense of self, is an amazingly interesting moral argument. And the fact that kind of like almost breaking free, like maybe the train has its own issues itself. And like all societies, to work in a certain way, it has to kind of crush certain people. I like that the train almost isn't ready for that sort of argument, which kind of brings up a whole larger conversation, is like, why is this train created? Who is it holding back? Who is it hurting? I think the first one feels like it was just sort of setting up the world and getting into why the world is the way it is at that time. But this one's getting into like, well, one's the conductor again, but what are the ins and outs of this? And what is the rules of the society? And how did this society work within itself? And MT kind of like just out of wanting to not be just stuck in this world, being constantly haunted, being called a slither and all these things, and wanting to have her own identity and her own life, how that like tears everything apart, shows you that that society of the Infinity Train maybe is in itself, even though it is helping people and doing right by a certain class of people, by the passengers, it is in itself not right, maybe possibly for the denizens and the people that are being created to service them, which is a whole other interesting, crazy argument. And the fact that we're only in like episode like 20 or something, I guess at this point, is crazy that they're going into those sort of arguments with it, and really like thinking out like, well, what would that actually mean to have this thing? You know, it's not so much about like what this wasteland thing is and what dimension it is, although I wonder that too. It's also the argument of like, well, how could this coexist? And there are very serious like moral and societal problems with having that exist. And MT kind of brings that all up. I think, you know, Jesse was sort of to show you the thing with that is like, these people come, they mean so much to these people, and then they are gone, and they suddenly have to become something of themselves. And what she wants is to leave like all of them, because she's so much of a self, probably more so personality wise, than Jesse. And I really loved that kind of intensely beautiful moral argument within it, while also using kind of science fiction and animation to say kind of a larger moral argument than we're necessarily getting from even, you know, the most intelligent so-called shows. This show is able to do all that while having crazy characters, surreal ideas. I mean, it is just like such a beautiful feast of an animated show. I think it's probably the greatest example of being like kind of a weird cult science fiction animation show and being sort of left alone to play in your own kind of weird vein. I wish more people would notice it, but I kind of almost just wanted to be able to be successful enough to continue. I would like this thing to you know, keep going. I don't think it's like going off the rails or anything like that. I think it is a beautifully written and beautifully thought out show that maybe certainly not enough people are talking about, but I think the psychology and the intelligence of it is so interesting to go into, and I love even almost rewatching it and thinking about all the possibilities of ideas, while also thinking about all the possibilities of worlds and theories and things that are going on within it. It's such a rich, intelligent, smart world, and just kept opening up more doors and more ideas throughout it, getting me even more excited for this franchise to really continue. So if you have seen Infinity Train Book 2 and you would like to talk about it, then comment below in the comments and subscribe if you would like to.